Hello and welcome to this Q&A from the Fertility Alliance. Today we're joined by Dr. Carrie Smith, who's a senior lecturer at Cardiff University, and Carrie is going to talk to us a bit about her project representing assisted reproduction. So welcome, Carrie. I wonder if you
Thank
could
you.
start by explaining what is this project?
It grew out of when I was having my own fertility treatment, and then I started thinking about the ways in which I'd seen it represented or not. And my area of expertise more broadly is in poetry. And so I started thinking, can I find this in poetry anywhere? Because it used to be that even writing about motherhood in poetry was deemed kind of not publishable. No one would be interested. No one wanted to do it, which has completely changed now. And there's some brilliant work on like the complexity of motherhood. And then as I was reading, I started finding lots of poetry engaging with this topic, which wasn't really what I was expecting. I thought maybe I'd find a few. And as it started to rack up and up and up, I thought there's something going on here really interesting. And so then I started turning this eventually into a project, thinking about how is it represented. And what motivated my original interest was in the language. So we have a set of kind of cultural, linguistic commonplaces that we expect to hear in the West about fertility, which is things like barrenness, sterility, like all of those languages that we inherit historically. And they have historical resonances because of things like the barrenness question is about farming. So if you don't produce a new generation, you don't have any farmers to continue producing food and so on. And these are also there like everyday metaphors. So when you're in a society that relies on agriculture, you would expect to find these metaphors, but they persist into kind of modern day. And I was interested in, okay, well, if you're a writer now, if you're particularly a female writer now, thinking about your infertility or your fertility treatment and coming across all of these metaphors when you try and write about it, what do you then do with that? So, how do you adapt this language? How do you make it something new and different, or how do you challenge it, or do you not challenge it, or and so on? So that's where my kind of investigation sort of began, and then the project now. I've written some work about contemporary poetry and about what they do with these metaphors and how they handle them. And then now I'm going to think sort of more broadly in the future. I'm going to write some more about literature and poetry, but I want to also think about representation in film and media and the arts and so on. But really, my academic interest sort of began because a lot of the research around fertility treatment is comes out of what you'd expect: the sciences, medicine, the law, philosophy, but there's very little on kind of literature and creativity and the arts, which I think is really, really important when people are going through these kinds of treatments. That you often find that people do want to seek out artistic reflections of themselves in some fashion to help them think about the process, which can be a very strange and often alienating process as well.
So what's the project doing now? What sort of things have you been doing?
As I said, I wrote a piece about two poets, a Korean American poet called Monica Yoon and an American poet called Alison Cobb, and the work that they did on particularly the idea of things like naturalness and how that feeds into when your conception is doesn't fit into those ideas of naturalness. And then on top of that, I've been running some creative writing, poetry writing workshops and discussion groups for the general public that are sort of free and open to get people thinking about writing poetry themselves. And that comes partly just because I think it's really valuable to sit down and try and wrestle with some of those elements. And partly I'm interested in what happens to the way that people talk about their fertility when they try and do so creatively. So there's quite a bit of academic research on things like how people talk about fertility treatment or infertility on social media. So the kinds of metaphors they would use for that, so that you get the things that you might expect, like the fact that it feels like a roller coaster, the fact that it feels like it has a lot to do with luck, like roll of the dice, There's a lot of metaphors around work, about the labor of how difficult it is to keep track of appointments and everything else, that it feels like a kind of a second job. And I'm interested in, okay, well, when people come to process those ideas creatively, does the language they use change, or are they still invested in those same kinds of questions, and how do they approach them? So that's why I sort of started to get people to think about writing. But the groups that I've been running are based on, we take like a particular topic and think it through, and I bring a poem to the group that we look at, and we do some simple kind of exercises to get us going. Like most people who come have never written poetry before. It's not a kind of that kind of group. It's like you start very basic and build up. And the last one we did was about the strange spaces that you inhabit during fertility treatment, of clinic waiting rooms, of treatment rooms, of the fact that it seems like every fertility clinic has like horrible purple chairs, and you have to wear those strange, your partner has to wear those strange like crackly overshoe things. That's like comes up in one of the poems. And so we've been working through the fact that you'll go into a treatment room, and because your emotions are so heightened, you'll strangely notice that they have some odd thing on their desk, or those kinds of things that stick with you, and this sort of surrealness of going into those spaces and then going back to your job, and how that feels. So that's what we were sort of thinking about in the last session. And then in the future, I've asked people, what do they want to cover? Things that have come up are like waiting, so the 2-week wait, and things like that, and the strangeness of having an embryo created in a lab while you're elsewhere wandering around existing have it in your life. So just things like that's what we're sort of interested in. And the groups have been a really lovely space. The people that attend are like have been very supportive of each other and their writings, and have found a lot of I think community and mirror, because often they speak about feeling quite isolated.
Do you think there is a therapeutic element to the workshops as well?
Yeah, I think it can't help but be that, really. And it's proven, there's been a lot of research about the value of creativity in therapeutic spaces, and the way in which it allows you to rethink your experiences in different ways. Just the process of trying to shape something creatively, to think about it in a creative manner, helps you to think about your experience in a slightly different fashion. And also, if you're engaging with creative work on the topic, then you're seeing how somebody else has processed it, which I think is also really valuable. So looking at these other poems, and the way in which they've dealt with all these strange experiences that you find yourself in, I think is helpful for you to think about your own experience and to feel less alone.
And who can come to your workshops? I think probably sometimes people feel a bit overawed by the idea of a poetry workshop. It sounds like you have to have a certain level of skill to be there in the first place, but who are they open to?
Anyone can come. So anyone who has had treatment or is having treatment, even if it was a decade ago, or if it was yesterday, both are absolutely fine. And it's open to anyone. No writing experience needed. We work really slowly through the exercises so that we build up. We don't start immediately with you have 10 minutes to write a poem. It's not an exam or anything. And the way that they work is you can have your camera off. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. It's there for you to do your own writing. You can choose to share with the group. So a lot of people opt to put something they've written in the chat, so that other people can see them. But you don't have to. Other people say nothing and put nothing in the chat, and that's totally fine, because it's about you and your experience and what you want to write, and it doesn't have to be something that you share. And so anyone can come, and nobody should feel intimidated. It's a very supportive environment, and it's you just sign up through Eventbrite, and it's a free ticket. And they've been really lovely experiences so far, and I'm hoping to be able to run some more in the future.
I was going to ask you about that. When might we see another one?
Yeah, I haven't got a date for the next one yet, but they've been roughly every couple of months. So I just ran one yesterday, in fact. So perhaps maybe November time.
And ultimately, what do you hope to achieve with this project?
Well, I'm hoping to understand a little bit more about the way in which assisted reproductions, which covers everything really, any kind of, IUI, IVF, fertility investigations, anything, is represented in literature, media, and the arts, so that we can understand a little bit more about and unpick a little bit about the kind of cultural baggage around it and the importance of the way in which it's represented for people undergoing treatment as well. So one thing I want to look at in the future is film and TV and the way in which we see it on screen, which I think is often not great, to put it sort of mildly, because I feel like it's often used as a shorthand for a character, just to say like, oh, they're having all these problems or they're this kind of person because they're infertile or any of those things, and that has a very long tradition as well. Um, and so I want to think about that sort of in the future of the project, but for now I'm focusing on poetry and literature. But I think that the arts have a really important place in what is often a kind of scientific and medicalized um, discourse, and partly I think that the arts help us to humanize the experience, because a lot of the poetry thinks about the jargon around it and how difficult it can be and alienating it can be to be processing all of the acronyms and everything else, and how your life gets sort of reduced down to these shorthand for various elements that you become like, a walking set of ovaries or follicles, or right down to these, and you just become anatomized into your body parts rather than a whole person. And I think that what literature and writing can give you back is that sense of yourself as a whole person. Um, so, for example, there's a poem we looked at in the last session, that is by Carmen Jimenez, and it's called Arts Poetica. And she just writes a huge list of statements about herself. And one of them is, I am not fertile, but it comes within a myriad of different things, like loads of different facets of who she is. And that's just one part. And I think that's what literature and poetry and the arts can give you back, is that sense of yourself as a whole person, and to sort of rehumanize that medicalized discourse and give you back to yourself a little bit, in the process, through reflecting on it in a creative way.
And at the moment, these are poetry workshops. Are you thinking about also doing creative writing, or will it always just be poetry workshops?
It's a good question. I hadn't thought about that really. I mean, I think that you could do both. Like a lot of what we do begins by writing in prose. So thinking, just making notes about things like, when you were last in a waiting room, what were the things that were in the waiting room, what color were the chairs, what terrible artwork was on the walls, that's supposed to be soothing, what kind of terrible magazines did they have, and you start by making just notes that are in prose, and then eventually you shape that into something with kind of line breaks and shapes and so on. But certainly it could go into a long form. I think one of the things that's interesting is, a lot of the biggest genre for writing about assisted reproduction is memoir. So there's a lot of memoir. That's kind of one of the main areas that you see this, where people just really need to reflect creatively. And there's lots of different ones. I think there's one called by Bell Boggs called The Art of Waiting. There's one, I've forgotten the author now, but one called Knocking Myself Up, which is all about like getting pregnant by yourself, and things like that. And yeah, so there's loads of reflection on that, which I think can be really interesting to read. There's also quite a lot of graphic memoir, interestingly, which is a sort of subset of the same genre. But no, I mean, I'd be open to doing all sorts of writing, but I think people can take it where they want to in the session as well. So if they want to take it more into the long form and that suits them, again, because you don't have to share back with the group if you don't want to, continue to write. And I know some people have said they've taken, because I send the prompts around at the end of the session for people to do in their own time as well, that they continue writing after the workshop, which I think is really nice to hear.